We are here at the Delhi Center here in the central part of our city for the Alliance for a Healthy Orange County in partnership with OC Pitch for our annual Active Transportation forum that is at the intersection of transportation and housing. So today we have Chuck Marone, who's our keynote speaker and also led us in this walk. He is a civil engineer and a planner by trade, so it's great to hear from a practitioner that actually understands what's needed on the ground per se.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. I'm really happy to be here. We had a great walking tour this morning. Any chance that I get to come to California is fantastic, not only because I'm from Minnesota and California is like the golden state of opportunity and happiness and joy and you know, perpetually beautiful weather. But California, as a planner and engineer, is such a fascinating state. It's such a fascinating place. You have managed to construct a system that creates huge bubbles out of everybody else's like slight upturns, and then huge catastrophes out of everybody else's downturns. You have constructed the most volatile system of governance and being that you could possibly have. And it's fascinating to come here and watch it. And I know it's not, you know, I'm only part joking. I'm really not. I mean, this is a fascinating state because of what you have done. And I think it's even more fascinating because of what is going to happen and how you're going to react to that. I actually find Santa Ana to be a fantastic model, not only for the region, but for the country. I think the things that are happening here, I think the conversations that are happening here, I think the way people are adapting and choosing to live in response to stresses like unaffordable housing and difficult transportation environments. I think these things are models that we can all learn from. And I've spent some extra time here trying to document some of those and understand those because we want to share those with the rest of the world. Very briefly, our mission is to support a model of development that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. We understand fundamentally that our cities are broke. And I don't mean that in like the passive way that politicians talk about being broke. I mean, we are insolvent. We have more things we have promised to do than we have the wealth to do. And so what our kind of driving force is to actually not pretend that someone else will take care of that problem, but to actually explore what that really means and what we have to do to adapt. I got invited to go to the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. And when we went there, a good friend of mine named Joe Minicosi and I, the city told us that they were in huge financial distress. Particularly, they were trying to maintain their roads, and they had an over $50 million backlog of road maintenance. And every year, they were adding $3 million to that backlog, even though they were trying desperately to keep up. And they said, you know, we're broke. Like, what is going on? And we dug into this, and I just want to give you a little bit of the highlights because I think it's instructive to what we have done here in California. One of the things we found, they had some really good old maps, and we were able to pull some information that was very detailed on their water system. What we found was that post-World War II, their population grew from around 33,000 to 121,000. Huge amounts of growth. They had 3.5 times population growth in that period of time. In that same period of time, their water system grew by 10 times. They had 5 feet of pipe per person right after World War II. And by 2015, that had grown to 50 feet of pipe per person. So if you think about the city, way back then, each person had to generate enough wealth and enough prosperity in order to have excess to take care of 5 feet of pipe. Today, that amount is 50. When we looked at hydrants, because they had really good information on that as well, we found that that had grown by 21 times. So you've got population up by 3.5, the number of pipe up by 10, the amount of pipes up by 21. So what did that do to our family wealth? Our family wealth was only up 1.6 times. This is something we see everywhere, and we see it enormously here in California. What we see is that it takes more and more effort to get a little bit of outcome. It takes more and more stuff to generate a tiny increment of wealth and prosperity. Because we tend to measure in this country wealth and prosperity by GDP growth, by the number of transactions, by the amount of sales tax revenue, what is going on is that it takes us more and more effort to do less and less stuff. And where it's not translating in is to the health and prosperity of our families, of our businesses, and of our communities. One of the things that I did early on at Strong Towns was to look at our development pattern and start to ask some questions about the finances of them. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. This was built in the mid-1990s. When this was built, the city paid half the cost of paving the street. The property owners paid the other half. Now, the property owners continue to pay taxes. The city continues to collect taxes, and when the street falls apart, it's now 100% the city's responsibility to go out and fix that. What we asked was, based on the amount of tax revenue produced and captured from these property owners that live on this dead-end cul-de-sac, how long is it going to take the city to recoup the money that they spent to build the road? The answer is 37 years. The road's not going to last 37 years. It's going to take that long for the city just to recoup the initial investment. Of course, from that point forward, someone has to pay to maintain that road. It won't be the people there. They're not generating enough wealth. Here's another kind of development we're used to. This is a closed loop with a dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic, no commercial traffic. These are just residential homes. When this was built, the developer came in and paid all the costs to put in the road and the sewer and the water and the storm sewer and the sidewalks and the curbs and all that. The cost was rolled into the sale price of the homes. People have been paying that on their mortgage, counting it as part of their property value ever since. At the same time, these property owners have been paying taxes to the city to fix and maintain all this stuff. We asked the question, based on the taxes the city collects from the people that live within this development, how many years is it going to take for them to maintain this? They had to go out and do a maintenance project. The cost was $354,000. Based on the taxes collected, it would take 79 years for the city to make that up. Spoiler alert, the road's not going to last 79 years. We asked the question, what if we wanted to raise enough money from these property owners to actually fix and maintain their own roadway between now and the time the roadway fell apart? What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all the money going just to the roadways. The sewer, the water, the sidewalk, all that is like vastly more expensive. Sometimes people say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We lose money on residential. We're going to make it up on commercial properties where we get all our cash. This is a business park. This is the kind of thing that cities like to do to create jobs and growth and big capital investments. This one was built in the mid-1990s. It's got the wide industrial streets, sewer, water, storm sewer. Today, it is completely built out. Every single lot is occupied. And the city said, this is so successful, we want to build the same exact thing on property right next door. We want to take what we've got here and just build the same thing right next door. We said, okay, great. If we could build the same thing for the same investment and get the same amount of money, would this be a good project? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million. There's $6.6 million of value that we can measure out there. Pause for a second. Of the value that's been created in this industrial area, 4 of the lots are a church. 2 of the lots belong to the school district. It's their bus maintenance facility. 2 of the lots, one of them is a county maintenance garage. One of them is a city maintenance garage. These are all very important. Like, we need churches, we need schools, we need maintenance buildings, but none of them pay any taxes to the city. In order, when we were looking at this as well, what we found is that every single lot, besides those that I already mentioned, they received a tax subsidy in order to attract them to move into this city. For the sake of our analysis, we had to assume that every single lot would be built on within 12 months of our new park opening up. They would all be built on by entities that paid taxes and received no subsidies at all. And every penny of new revenue would have to go towards paying down that debt. If that were the case, it would take us almost 3 decades, 29 years, to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would have to go up to pay to sweep the streets, mow the ditches, provide police protection, fire protection, and all the other services that we want. And that's in the most wildly optimistic scenario. Let me show you what's going on here. I used to, in the early days of doing this presentation, go through and give you, because I've done dozens of these. After a while, people start to cry, and they just don't. You can make the point without all the pain. Let me show you what's going on. And I apologize, I am an engineer. I do like charts. There's a handful of charts in this presentation. They won't be all that painful. Just hang with me. Let's say that a developer comes to our community. Says, I have a piece of property here I would like to build upon. I'm willing to follow all of your rules and regulations. I'm not asking for any special favors. I don't want any tax subsidies from you at all. I'm willing to, at my expense, build all the residential homes, build all the commercial buildings. I will put in to your standards the roads and the streets and the curbs and the sidewalks, the pipes, the pumps, the valves, the meters. I'll pay for all that. The only thing that I ask as a developer is that when I get done making this investment in your community, that you, the city, the public, agree that you will take over the long-term responsibility to serve and maintain this stuff. What would we say? Sure. Yeah, we'd say, fantastic. We spend nothing. You make all the investment. We get all this tax base and growth. Oh, of course we would do this. This is fantastic. But let's say, you know, we heard of this strong town stuff. We're going to be smart, prudent people. When the money comes in from this new development, what we're going to do is we're going to take that portion that would normally get siphoned off and spent in other places, and we're going to set that aside. And every year when that money comes in, we'll take that portion, we'll set it aside, we'll allow it to accumulate so that when we get out a generation from now, we'll have a pot of money there that we can draw on to make good on all these promises we're making as we grow. Here's what that looks like. In year one, everything is brand new, hasn't cost you anything. The money comes in, you take that portion, and you set it aside. In year two, more money comes in, you add to what you had in year one. In year three, you add a little bit more, and on and on and on. And you can see a 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. And so as you go out in time, all you have is money coming in. You're feeling very, very rich, right? You get out 2 decades, and you've got this huge pot of money. The problem is when you get to the day when you have to make good on those promises, what you find is that the cumulative amount of money you brought in is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far into the negative. Now, cities aren't one development, right? Cities are a collection of developments. They're a series of neighborhoods. So let's say, just for the sake of this conversation, that the developer comes back in a couple years later. Says, you know, I've got a similar sized property. I'd like to do a similar project that worked out really well for you, worked out really well for me. Everybody jumps up and down and says, yeah, that's ideal, right? And every other year from this point forward, a developer comes in with the nice, steady, continuous growth, right? Like a new similar sized project, just on and on. The ideal scenario for any city. And we take that money and we set it aside and we allow it to accumulate. Here's what that looks like. Your first project comes online here at the very beginning. It pays in for the entire 25 years shown. You've got another project then that comes online, and another and another. And you can see, not only do you not have any expenses at this point, everything is brand new, has been paid for by somebody else, but you're having all this growth. You're having a lot of cash come in. You're having growth upon growth. Your cash actually starts to accelerate upwards. You're feeling very, very rich. And when you get to year 25, in this example, and you have to make good on that very first promise you made way back in the beginning, you know, you've got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? It's not a big deal. You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money over the long run on every project that you do, the further you go out in time, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. I want to pause here and talk about a couple of things. First, this is a theoretical construct to help you think through the trade-offs of growth, the trade-offs of our pattern of development, the way we build. The fascinating thing about California is you've actually constructed a system to make this go even higher during the growth time and even deeper during the latter time. Prop 13 does nothing but magnify that disparity. It allows you to front-run cash and back-run liabilities. It actually takes this situation and puts it on steroids. This is a situation that every city in the country is dealing with. California cities are dealing with it in a hyper sense. We just got done with an election season last year. And regardless of your political viewpoints or how you voted in that election, when we step back and look at it, what we had were two 70-year-old candidates looking back into their past history and pointing to the period of time that they thought we should go back to. Let's make America great again. Let's make America more compassionate. Let's go back to, the period of time when we were spending on, we came up with Medicare and we expanded Social Security and we did things. Let's go back to the period of time when we were investing in businesses and there were jobs for people and a blue-collar worker could make a living. That's what our election was. It was two 70-year-olds looking back to the past. What were they looking back to? They were looking back to that period of time right there. That's what they were looking at. We live way, way out here. Way, way, way out here. Do you recognize yourself in this graph? Do you recognize you? Because these are not failings of our political left or political right. They're not American failings. These are human flaws, right? This is why people smoke, right? This is why you will go home tonight and have a bowl of ice cream and sit on the couch and watch the Angels lose. That was unfair. I hope that I have to say, the Angels are my favorite team. I'm not saying that to patronize all of you. I'm obsessive about the Twins. My Angels are my favorite second team. How can you not like Mike Trout, right? For crying out loud. So this is why you will go home tonight and have that bowl of ice cream and sit on the couch instead of going for a run, right? I really like this ice cream. This is a good TV show. Uh-oh, heart disease, right? The psychologists call this temporal discounting. This is the way that we're wired as humans. This is a human flaw. We are wired to highly value positive things today and to deeply discount, if not completely ignore, negative feedback in the future. That's who we are. That's a human failing. Think about this for a second. Go back thousands of years and think about how people used to build cities. Even go back 100 years and think about how this city was built. What happened to the civilizations that built a development pattern and an economy around exploiting this human flaw? They went away. They didn't survive. We have, with our post-World War II experiment, this new way of building that we didn't try out and tinker with. We just went and did across an entire continent all at once. We have created an economic system, a system of building our places and our neighborhoods that is based on exploitation of this human flaw. And it's not a financially viable model. We are all living way, way, way out here. And when I start with that slide of Lafayette and show how not only have we grown our population and our liabilities while not growing our family wealth, Lafayette, Louisiana, if you're a family living there, you pay $1,500 a year to the city in taxes. You pay other taxes to the school district and the parish and what have you, but $1,500 you pay directly to the city. In order for them to take care of just their infrastructure, not invest in transit, not take care of their schools, none of that, just the roads and streets and pipes that they have built, just to take care of that, the typical family would need to go from paying $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 the median family makes when you get sent to the city just to fix roads and streets. That will never happen. That will never, ever happen. There's a model for what happens to cities like this. There's a model that you can see in this country of what happens when cities take their wealth and spread it out over this huge area with all these promises and liabilities just so they can experience growth in the short term. What city am I talking about? Yeah. Yes. There's a lot of people who describe Detroit in many different ways. I will give you my way of describing Detroit. Detroit was the Motor City. They got started building in this way 20 years before everybody else. We copied them. We're just 20 years behind them. When we look at California, what we see is that you took the part of Detroit's development pattern that was on the outskirts, the build a highway, interchange, development along it, like repeat. In California, you took that part, which was actually like the most financially insane part of it. The other part of it is running the highways through the middle of the city, denuding that, clearing things out, knocking down buildings to build parking ramps. You did some of that, but you didn't have that much of that. What you had was a lot of space, and you built the crazy stuff to no end. I'm going to skip this because it's too depressing. How are we doing okay on time? Okay, then we'll do this depressing one here. If you weren't all depressed enough already, let's talk about this. Because I do think that this is a central part of the California story too. It's an American story, but it's also part of who we are here. This is a chart of debt. Everybody in this room knows the conversation we have at the federal level about our debt. $20 trillion now. $1 trillion is an insane amount of money. I like to point out that when I was a kid, we had the weekly reader. You guys all had weekly readers here. I remember being in Mrs. Altrechter's 4th grade class, and there was this little breakout box in the weekly reader, and this would have been like the early 80s, right? Mid 80s. It said if you took the national debt, which at that point was tiny compared to what we are now, if you took the national debt and converted it into dollar bills and stacked them on top of each other, they would go to the moon and back like 23 times or something, right? Like replacing one abstract concept with another abstract concept would make things clear for a 4th grader, right? These are insane amounts of money. They're beyond our ability to get our minds around. That's how huge these numbers are. In this chart here, the bottom line, that blue one, that's the growth in our public sector debt. That's the growth in that astounding number. The black one right above it is the growth in our GDP. This green line, the one that soars up like that, that's our private sector debt. That's debt we share. That's home mortgages, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans. It's private sector debt. The way we generated growth in this first life cycle, this new experimental way to build America, was to take our savings and then reinvest that illusion of wealth back into more growth. When that started to bog down, when liabilities started to come due, the economy started to change, we overreached. It took us a while to figure out what to do, but we eventually shifted from an economic model based on growth through savings and investment to one based on growth through debt accumulation. And growth through debt accumulation has become such an important part of our economy that we've actually allowed it to become predatory. I am constantly baffled by the people who suggest that in California, people can spend 60 to 70% of their income on housing. It's just not possible. And I realize that we go through the numbers and we look at it and that's how it works out in some places. But when you run it, it all is predicated on one thing. And this was so obvious in 2006 and 2007. And today, somehow it's not obvious to us. If you live in a house, if you live in a house where the family makes $40,000 a year, but the house appreciates in value by $50,000 a year, it's like having another wage earner just sitting there on the land, right? And it becomes this self-reinforcing kind of thing. What drives that? And I know we like to tell ourselves it's because everybody wants to live here. It's because we're such a wonderful... No, nobody wants to spend 70% of their income on housing. What is it? It's this. It's this. It's this right here. It's 0% interest rates. It's the Federal Reserve buying every mortgage that is issued. It's a huge demand for anything that would create any type of yield on Wall Street. You know, this chart here ends in like 2010. And sometimes people say, well, Chuck, what, you know, why don't you show what else has happened? Because it certainly doesn't stay like this. And the reason I don't is because it makes the narrative more difficult, because people, you know, because the chart gets confusing a little bit after this. But what actually happened to this chart in 2010, the green line? It started to go down until about 2014, 15, and then it leveled off, and now where is it? It did this. It went, and now it's up here. Let's do an interactive exercise. 2001 to 2008 was a housing. All right. 2012 to 2017 is a housing recovery, right? It's like you're on the same Mount Everest, but you just have different names for it, right? Like we climb Mount Everest once and we call it Mount Everest, and we climb it again and we call it Mount something else, because we don't want to be on Mount Everest again, right? We're in like this crazy, crazy, crazy place. This slide I had to put in this presentation because of California. I was going around and I was talking about this, and for the rest of the time we're going to talk about how we think about our cities differently. I would get to the end of my presentation, and this happened in California. In California, I would get to the end and people would stand up and they would say, Chuck, I'm really angry with you. You came here and scared us, but you didn't give us the solution. What's the solution to these problems? And it took me a while to learn to speak Californian. But I finally got this. In California, because in Minnesota, a solution is like 1 + 1 = 2, 2 is the solution. In California, what this is what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing? That's a solution. Let me disappoint you. There are no solutions to these problems. Problems have solutions. Predicaments have outcomes. And what we have created here for ourselves is a complex set of predicaments that we're going to have to manage. I think being in Santa Ana gives us a really good preview of what some of that is, and the ingenuity and the spirit of this place actually gives me a lot of hope for what this country can be and what it can become. But let's not kid ourselves. There's no set of things we can do that will allow us to continue or have someone else change so that our lives don't have to change. That's just not going to happen. I am from a little town in central Minnesota called Brainerd. It's 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis-St. Paul in the deep woods. This is what it looked like back in 1904. When I first saw this photo, I was astounded. The planner in me looks at the way the buildings line up, the way they frame the public realm at just the right ratios. There's good segmentation in the street. The buildings have great symmetry. They face the street and is a perfect... This is an exquisitely designed street. How thick was the building code that these guys used? How many boards and committees did they have to go to get an approval to build something? How many grants did they get from the state? How many federal infrastructure loans? How much tax subsidy did they give out? How many engineers and planners and economic development advisors did they have on staff? We can go through the litany of things that we have convinced ourselves are absolutely essential to building great places. These people had none of them. None. These were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. They didn't even have 30-year mortgages, right? How did they build something so spectacular? It's really simple. They just copied what they knew worked. They looked at thousands of years of human history of building cities, and they copied what they had seen work. With all of our advances, our new ways of laying out places, here's what the road standards got to be, here's what the street sections got to be, all our new ways of financing things and zoning things, and all of our professionalism that we brought to this, millennia-old art of building cities, this exact street has been transformed now into this. It's the exact same street from roughly the same spot. It's now a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. And if you want to understand why your city's budget struggles and why my city budget struggles, there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that little stretch of street. Where's the wealth that's going to pay for that generation after generation after generation? It's not there. I was in I gave a lecture at a university in Boise, Idaho, and I showed this picture, and a student raised their hand, stood up and said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you build here. When we're going to build something, we have to go out, we have to fill in every single gap. We only build one block at a time, and before we can build the next block, we have to make sure that every gap is filled in on the block we just built. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We can't afford to build this way. Yeah, we can't afford to build this way either. And for a long time, that illusion of wealth made us think that this kind of thing didn't matter. That this kind of thing, like we could have pipes all over the place, roads all over the place. You want it 14 feet wide? No, let's make it 16. Just give us a couple little bit, You want an interchange every 2 miles? No, let's make it every mile and a half. It's like we thought like these things didn't matter. We were so wealthy, so rich that we didn't stop to ask, what kind of wealth do we need to generate to actually take care of this stuff? The difference between cities that are going to be successful in the next generation and cities that are going to fail and struggle are going to be the ones that start obsessing over those kinds of questions. So, one of the things we need to do, you want solutions? I'll give you a strategy. One of the things we need to do is divorce ourselves from our worst habits. Build it and they will come is a fantastic movie plot. It is a horrible economic development strategy. And I realized that during that boom part of what it means to be a Californian, it feels like you can do no wrong, right? We go out and build something, we build a transit stop, and we come up with a transit-oriented development plan, and, yes, all this stuff happens, and isn't it great? The very interesting thing about it is that when our government becomes like the lead agent of growth, when we are the ones who make the investment first and then try to backfill it with private investment, the incentive structure is all messed up. Everything becomes like the idea of getting a return on investment goes out the window. And I know there's some TOD things going on here that people are struggling with or debating. Let me tell you how countries that are really serious about TOD do it. Let's go look at Japan. Japan has lots of transit-oriented development and are often held up as like a model for us. We could just follow Japan and do what they do. Well, you know what they do? When they go and put a transit stop, they condemn every what would be our version of it. They go out and condemn and acquire every property at pre-TOD prices. So, we're going to put it in right here. We're going to condemn within a mile of this thing. We're going to take every single property at like bargain basement prices. Then we're going to go, bam, put $1 billion public investment in. That raises the property value of everything. Then we're going to sell that back and use that capital to actually pay for the line. Then we're going to get the development going, and then the people using it are actually going to pay for the operations and maintenance. That's not what we do, because we're not serious. What do? We go and acquire the land for the line, put it in, make all the speculators around it rich. The speculators hold on to the property and want to be the last one to invest because their carrying costs are so low. Their tax structure is made to reward them for hanging on. So you go to your TODs and what do you have? You have a field of parking lots and not any development. And then we wonder why we're broke. We wonder why we're not creating wealth. We have to look and understand that this is not how you build wealth. And this is not how cities have ever built wealth. I'm going to show you right now the very simple way that cities go about building wealth. Does this city look familiar to any of you? It's not Santa Ana, obviously. The materials are wrong. But you at one point had a little thing like this, right? They're often missions or what have you here. You'd have the little stop. Every city that was ever built in all of human history before our current, like post-World War II experiment started just like this, right? Little pop-ups. Some people with some hopes and some dreams. We can look at cities like, like San Francisco, like Los Angeles, like Santa Ana, San Diego. You can go up to Seattle or Vancouver. You can go to Chicago, to Dallas, to Kansas City, Manhattan. Manhattan at one point looked just like this, right? If you've ever been to New York City and walked among, the nation's most intense development pattern, these huge skyscrapers, understand that if you went back in time, Manhattan looked like that. We built thousands of these across this country, and for a variety of complex reasons, a lot of these failed. What happened when a city like this failed? Did the stock market crash? Did unemployment skyrocket? Did we have to have emergency sessions of Congress to bail out banks? No. A handful of people lost a little bit of money. These were small little bets. They salvage what they could and they move on to the next place. We built thousands of these across this country. And when they were successful, when all those little variables came together, they would grow in a very simple to understand way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. So after 30 years, this is my hometown back in 1870, after 30 years of incrementally growing, it would become that block I showed you earlier. And after another 30 years of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and incrementally becoming more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. Today on our walking tour, we talked a couple times about cities being built out and how the concept of being built out is a very modern thing that we have imposed on ourselves. Throughout all of human history, no city was ever built out. They were always growing incrementally out, incrementally up, and becoming incrementally more intense. We don't build wealth in a community by going to a casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth is by making small investments over a broad area, over a long period of time. Let me show you how powerful this style of development is. On the left, I've got 2 blocks here that are identical in every way, except for the style of development. On the left, I've labeled it old and blighted. On the right, I've labeled it shiny and new. There's the same amount of public infrastructure, same area, same everything, just a different style of building. That block on the left, old, rundown, junky, neglected, it was built in the 1920s. As my city was growing incrementally, this was the next increment of out. After that happened, instead of continuing to grow incrementally, we had the Depression, we had World War II, we skipped right over this and just started building out on the edge. These places have stagnated for 90 years. The city labeled it blight, had it torn down, and now we got the new taco drive-through. Everybody was thrilled about this, right? We got rid of blight, we got a new investment, The new investment has gotten rid of it's got its own parking, so we got rid of the on-street parking. The cars can flow more smoothly. We now meet all the setbacks. We've got a little bit of green space, a little bit of native plants in the stormwater area. We even put in a sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right there, but we got that stretch. Here's what nobody bothered to consider. That old, blighted, run-down block, when this was built, had a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, it's only worth $800,000. The city's actually generated 42% more wealth in that old and blighted rundown block than in the one they replaced it with. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development, the way we built places for thousands of years around the world, in its infant state, after 90 years of neglect and decline, and it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And we all know what happens in time to that taco place, right? In fact, in the years subsequent to this being built, here's what's happened to the property values. We see the same thing when we build on the edge of town. Here's our big box complex. This is a double-sized big box auto dealership gas station, 20 acres, most valuable piece of property in the entire region where I live. Here's 20 acres of our core downtown. If you're a fan of the Coen brothers, have seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my hometown. Most of the second and third stories of these buildings are vacant. The first story struggles to keep tenants. There's been nothing new built in my life, lots that have burned down or been torn down for parking. When we look out on the edge of town, we see a massive investment. But when we go to the center of town, what we see is that there's 78% more wealth there. Same land area, different approach to development. One based on moving automobiles quickly in and out, providing adequate storage for them, connecting them with really, really expensive infrastructure. The other one built slowly and incrementally over time at the scale of humans, human habitat, human ecosystems. This is the same thing we see everywhere. We've modeled hundreds of cities around the country. A good friend of mine named Joe Minicozy does these great 3D models where he demonstrates where are you getting the greatest amount of value per acre. If you think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across the field, the parts of the fields that grow up most productively, we call the most productive parts of the field. You get the greatest yield per acre, right? So where is the greatest yield per acre in a city? Where's the greatest value per acre? I'm going to show you a handful of cities, all of them in decline, all of them in depression. This is Buffalo, New York. If you want to move to Buffalo, New York today, they will sell you a house for $1. You have a housing crisis here, they have the exact opposite one. They will sell you a home for $1. You can actually get a job there too if you want one. They'll sell you a home for $1. You just have to promise to live there for 5 years and fix it up, okay? So when the cry out of California is housing affordability crisis, and you wonder why like no one is hearing you, half the country has this problem, right? Half the country has this problem. When we look at Buffalo, can you point to, I'm going to show you now value per acre in the third dimension. Can you point to where their traditional downtown is? And not only is it, despite the decline, a massive repository of wealth, it absolutely dwarfs everything around it. Absolutely dwarfs everything around it. We see this in cities of all sizes. Here's one of around 50,000, same kind of thing. Here's a little one of 1,200 by where I live. When I first went to this city, they said, we've got great stuff happening out here, great stuff happening out here. These neighborhoods here are terrible. We need to do something to get them fixed, replaced, torn down, rebuilt, and then we show them where all their wealth is. Now I'm walking around Santa Ana, and I'm taking in your community. And I understand that part of the way this community is disrespected is that it is a go-between between places where people live and places where people work, right? You're like the liver of this circulatory system, right? And that's your strategy too, right? Let's have fast roads through it so we can get people through, and maybe we can entice them to pull off at our In-N-Out or what have you, right? That's a liver strategy. When I look at Santa Ana, I see these neighborhoods here. It's the same thing. The wealth of this region are in these neighborhoods here. And people are not even aware of it. Not even aware of it. The greatest wealth generation that you're going to see in this region is in this city on a per acre basis. And it will astound people. As I walk through these neighborhoods that are neglected, that suffer from neglect, where people drive through and don't see I just see nothing but wealth and opportunity. That's what I see here. And I think when you start running the numbers and looking at it, you'll see that same thing too. These could be anywhere. These happen to be in North Carolina, but the ratios are all the same. Everywhere we look, here's a Kmart at $384,000 an acre, a Walmart at $967,000 an acre. When we go to the core downtown, here's an old warehouse turned into a supper club, $5 million an acre. Here's Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. We look at places like Jimmy's Pizza with a certain level of disdain and disgust. This is beneath us. We don't build this way. We don't live this way. Yet, look at, first of all, the wealth being generated for the community. And second of all, think about the economics of Jimmy's Pizza, right? Think of the economic. Who runs that place? Jimmy. Yeah, Jimmy. And who is Jimmy? Yeah, he lives down the street. His kids go to the school with us. He goes to our church. He volunteers after school. He gives a little bit of his money to this charity in town. He has a parade. He is a float in the parade. You go through like all the things that having Jimmy in your neighborhood does. And even though his place is kind of run down and crappy in comparison to this stuff here, which is shiny and new, which we all like, this guy is paying the freight. This guy's paying the freight. And just so you understand the math here, this is not magic math. I'm an engineer. I designed and laid out these places for many years. There is miles of pipe and sidewalk in the ground there. That's what this is about. There's an enormous public investment in there that we're all blind to, that we all just don't even think about. It would overwhelm you. We were out looking at a little bump out today, and it was like $25,000. We had to get a grant. Do you know how much you threw into just like building a redundant interchange off your highway? You could put, bump outs at every house. That's what this is. Jimmy's is 18 feet wide. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anything. Go around Santa Ana and you'll see that's full of this stuff. All right. I've been elaborating on things because you keep smiling at me, so I figure just keep going.
Yeah, we'll just do some Q&A.
Okay. Do we have to right now?
No, just wrap. So in about 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Shoot it. You're the boss. You're the boss.
Am I? I feel like I'm up here and you can't kick me off yet. Here's the thing. When I start going, when people are like nodding and yes, like I feel like I'm, yeah. Anyway, this is a Strode. A Strode is a street road hybrid. We call this the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as being an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a Strode tries to do two things at the same time and does neither of them very well. It tries to be both street and road. What's the difference? A road is about moving you from one place to another. If you think of a railroad, which is a road on rails, you would get on at one spot, you get off at another. There's a high-speed connection between them. A street is a platform for building wealth. When you build a street, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get investment. You're trying to get people to move there, to live there, to shop there, to be there. You're trying to build wealth. The way you build wealth is by having people. People starting businesses, people starting families, people falling in love, people making business deals, people making art, making music. All these things happen on great wealth-producing streets. Streets are about building wealth. Roads are about movement. When we confuse them and try to do both in the same places, neither of it works. You have tried to make your highways in California about building wealth. I'm coming into Santa Ana today and it says Santa Ana, next 4 exits. Give me a break. All that does is make your highway, just everybody sits there and goes nowhere. But you can get on and off, right? When I get onto your streets are all designed so I can drive through quickly. They're designed like roads, but you're not building wealth the way you should. What we have to talk about is how we take and not build more of this stuff, but actually convert our roads, our stroads, into great roads that connect places and streets that actually build wealth in the community. This is actually pretty easy to do. From an engineering standpoint, it's really easy. Culturally, it's a lot harder. All these stroads that we have built in the city of Santa Ana that need to become streets, the primary thing we need to do is slow traffic. Like that is the primary thing we need to do. We need to prioritize people over automobiles. We actually need to have development happen and investment occur. That's part of this strategy. When we're going the other way, our roads, we need to close accesses. We need to limit them. We shouldn't be trying to build an interchange every 2 miles, every 1 mile. We should be building them 6 miles apart at least. What you've done in California is insane, insane. Every place we look, when we model success, when we say where are the places that are financially the most productive and the most successful, what we see time and time again is the same thing. We go out to those places and we look at them and we say, what's going on here? What's happening here? The same thing shows up every single time. We see the same thing. What is the one thing we see in every financially successful place? People. People. People are the indicator species of success. If you are working to try to make a place financially successful, you will know you're doing things right when people show up. When people are there walking around, biking, when they're outside of an automobile, ding, 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 that will tell you, yes, what I'm doing now is I'm on the right track. People are the indicator of success. And we'll end with this because I want to go through this because I want you to walk out of here confident, okay? When engineers go out and design the stroads in your communities, what they are doing is they are applying a set of values. They won't tell you their values, they'll tell you it's design. And engineers like to pretend that they have no values, right? Or they have values, but not that they apply to their work. They're not coming to their community imposing their values on you, in other words. All they're doing is just good design. But if you actually dig into it, what you see is that the engineering profession is full of values. And the values are inherent in that design process. When engineers go out and design a street, what they say, first of all, is what is the design speed? Or what is the speed that the traffic is going to flow through here? They then say, what is the amount of traffic we have to carry? So the speed and the volume. Then they say, okay, given this speed and this volume, what does the design manual say is a safe way to build this? And then what is the cost of doing that? Those are the values of the engineering profession in order from most important to least important. Let me ask you, if you think of the streets in your communities, not the roads, but the streets, the places where you live, the places where you go, the places where you shop, the places where you bring friends when they come to town, the places where you would want your kids out, being on. If you had to prioritize, and this is going to be the public engagement portion here, so I want you to yell out your priority. If you were to prioritize one of these values, which one would it be? Would you prioritize the speed at which traffic goes? Would you prioritize the volume of traffic you're able to handle? Would you prioritize the safety of the environment or the cost of the improvement? Would it be speed, volume, safety, or cost?
Safety.
Your second priority, if you had to pick a second one, would you prioritize the speed of the traffic, ensure that the traffic can flow at the right speed? Would you be worried about the volume of traffic that you can handle? Or would you be most concerned with the cost effectiveness of the improvement? If you had to pick speed, volume, or cost? Cost. I can't change these. They're already in the presentation. If you had to choose, would you rather ensure that traffic can flow at speed or that you can handle a set volume of cars? If you had to pick between those two, what would be your higher priority? Would it be speed or volume? Volume. Do you see what you just did? Do you see what you just did? Yes. You just took the value system that was being applied to your city and you inverted it. You did that. There is no reason why our streets should not reflect our values. There's no reason why they should not reflect the priorities that we have in our community. And doing so is not anti-growth. Doing so is not anti-prosperity. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Doing so is pro-growth, it's pro-wealth, it's pro-prosperity. The investments that we have made the last 70 years have bankrupted our cities. They have been a lot of top-down things, trying to create wealth, trying to create jobs. And what they've been designed to do is create kind of cash on the cheap, with our cities taking on the long-term liabilities and obligations. And what we need to do now is go back to those neighborhoods and focus on the small little things, the things we overlooked. How do you get across this street? How do you get safely down this corridor? How do we get a little Jimmy's Pizza started here? How do we get something else started there? And if we can focus at that scale, what we'll find is that we can make small investments that are low risk, that make our cities wealthier and make our people more prosperous. Thank you so much for having me today.
All right, thank you, Scott. Anybody have a question for Scott? Okay, back here.
I just had a question. I was looking at your slides and your pictures, and a lot of them were parking lots, which don't typically generate income. And that seems to be a pattern in most of your shots of kind of the blight. Anything that you can say in terms of what they did in the past for parking, the number of cars, how that relates to transportation? Maybe I'll stop there. I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, well, I think there's an easy answer and a more complicated answer to that. I mean, obviously, if you ask a transportation engineer, they're going to tell you, well, 100 years ago, they didn't have cars, so there wasn't a concern. And that's very true. Although we can go to other, it's important to understand how unique the American development pattern is. You can go to other countries around the world. You can go to South America, you can go to Europe. I've not had an opportunity to travel much of Asia. But you can go to these places and you can see that they have managed to accommodate the automobile without changing their development pattern. We are the ones who have changed our entire way of living around the automobile. And so we have become used to the concept of auto storage being essentially like a public good that we foist upon government, that we foist upon businesses. And what we have found, you know, there have been some really, really good work. You know, all Shoup's work at UCLA has been kind of instrumental in this. What we have found is that when people don't pay for parking, you get a bizarre amount of it. There's never enough of it. And it literally is like the thing bankrupting us. So I know there are people in this community that believe you have a parking problem. You do have a parking problem. You have too much parking. Now, if you think that through and realize that the big part of your solvency problem is a parking problem, and that is a constraint, it changes the way you think about everything else. So in other words, if me parking my car is like the thing that we can't solve, what can we solve? Well, we can actually get you places to go without having to get in your car. We can actually get you places where you can, you know, nearby you, we can help those come into existence where you don't have to drive. We can actually help a family of 2 cars go to be a family of 1 car. We can actually make it so that this community provides a lot more of what we need so we don't find the need to go other places. Those are long-term strategies. but they're actually strategies that will make you wealthier over time, as opposed to this race to what can we tear down and destroy so that we can create stuff that provides no tax base or wealth for us.
Great, thank you, Sammy.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
There were so many thoughts I have, but the one question that I'd like you to touch on is the concept of what people. So people-oriented and people-focused development is critical, but are we thinking about the future tourists that are coming in? How do we honor the local people in the local neighborhoods? Because I think this issue of equity and social justice can get lost as we get enticed by the way you presented. And I just wanted to hear from you, thinking about the honoring of the local communities and cultures here.
Let me be very clear about this. You mentioned the word tourists. I don't think you should even think about tourists. Like the greatest places in this world are great places for the people that are there, and that is the thing that attracts people to come to them. I think that all development that you do should start with and essentially end with the needs of the people that are here. It should be incremental. It should be small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. The way I would identify those investments is not to hire a consultant to tell you what they should be. It would not be to have a public hearing and have people put stickers on things on the wall. The way that I would determine it is to go out. If I'm working with the city government or I'm someone who's trying to get things going, what I would do is I would go out and humble myself to actually observe where that indicator species, people, right? Go out and observe where they are and then humbly follow them around and try to understand where they struggle. Do they struggle to get across this street? Do they struggle to get over here? Where are the struggles of the indicator species? And then I would say, what is the next smallest thing I can do right now to address this struggle? Is it planting a shrub here? Is it putting in a straw bale here to kind of block this? Is it putting out some cones in the street to narrow up the crossing? What is the smallest thing I can do? And how you know you're doing the right thing is if more of your indicator species show up, right? So city building needs to go from being a top-down thing that we impose to a bottom-up thing where we garden and nurture. And I say that as an engineer and a planner. It is more about now taking our stimulus and cues from actual people than it is from telling people the way that things should be. I hope that answers your question.
So my question kind of touches on what you got to at the end there, which is in Santa Ana, we're actually doing both like really great stuff around bulb outs and all those things, but also still widening streets, also still kind of taking the engineer's approach.
Right.
And what got me involved with the city is to make sure that my voice is heard and that the public's approach really goes out there. But I feel like I'm sometimes at a loss when there's engineers who are, public works directors and city managers and city council folks who are, making the decisions, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's true. She's probably the best one on the council for that. What I'm curious about is, have you seen examples of the public getting involved, and what are some of the ways that folks can get involved and actually kind of move us from the engineer's approach to the public's approach?
Yes, I have. Not so much in California. California, the people who get involved tend to just be NIMBY people, like want nothing. And if you are like, I want nothing to ever change, you're part of the problem. Like that's not an acceptable solution either. Where we see people actually getting involved in the way I'm describing are in cities that are much more desperate than you. Detroit, Memphis, they're full, New Orleans, they're full of people who take their own initiative and go out and do this kind of thing. That being said, are there opportunities here for you? Absolutely. I think the first one is to recognize the system that you live in. Your state gives your local engineers more money, the more if they can provide level of capacity for freeway overflow. That's crazy. That's crazy. And that is like an inducement to have a whole different set of values than the values that you have here. So I think standing up and asserting your values is the first one. But I also think being aware that, like, look, we may not get that extra state money. And we're going to have to be okay with that. And that may mean that some of our streets don't get paved and don't get fixed. But it's also going to mean that this main street does not have to be a freeway. We're not going to have to lose 2 blocks of houses for a widening. Let's take those 2 blocks and see what we can do to make them better. The thing that is dissatisfying about California, from the perspective of people who care, is that the machine pushing things down your throat, and I say this, I realize everybody has the best of intentions, but you're more of a cog in the machine here than in almost any other state.
Chuck, we have enough for 2 more questions. I want to get to that. So 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap up and go on to a coffee break. But you guys can talk to Chuck right afterwards. So let me
Localize things as much as you can.
So I wanted to see if you have suggestions on how do we educate and vocalize that urban and density are not bad words, and how do we create that paradigm shift of this is how it's been and this is how we want it to be.
Well,
How do we start that conversation?
I think we have a lot of government and planning people in here. And so the first thing that I would say is that don't let the government and planning people be the ones doing it. When planners tend to talk about density and then people can get behind it, then planners go out and do like atrocious things. Let's not talk about density, and let's not talk about urban living. Let's not talk about any of that. Let's talk about the neighborhood and where people struggle and how we make that a little bit better. And what we'll find is that as a result of like focusing on people, the demand for those things will happen. The demand for the corner shop is there right now. It's just, we've got to nurture it to come out. The demand for what I think we would call density and urban living is there. My understanding, and I think this is true based on my time here, is that Santa Ana is one of the most dense cities in the country. I heard the 4th densest city in the country. I have yet to see a building like over 4 stories. This is insane. You already have density, right? Why are your people leaving the city? Why do they have to get in their cars? You have more wealth here. Like, why are you just need to deploy it differently? So to me, I think getting that conversation out of I would not talk about density, period. I would not talk about urbanism, period. I would talk about the community we have, where people struggle, and how we make that a little bit better. And if we can have that focus, I think all the goals of density and urbanism will be byproducts of that conversation.
Great. We have one final question, and then we're going to go into a break, and then you guys have about 25 minutes to talk with Chuck, and then definitely go to these sessions where you are able to get a rapid video. Our last question right here.
All across the country, the most dynamic and productive adaptation I see everywhere is occurring sub rosa without official permission. You just skip this whole process, you just get on with life, discuss it.
It's happening here too. And I think that's why you have the level of density that you do. So I think the observation is a brilliant one. I'm from Minnesota. We like rules. We like order. We like hot dishes, as you've pointed out. We like potlucks. We like barn raisings. There's all these like things that we like. I think as a society, our level of affluence has kind of forced us into a mindset where things have to go through official channels to be good. And what we realize when we actually look at places in this country or places around the world that are the most successful, what we realize is that the public sector does very little. There's very little of that. And in fact, a lot of the things that we put in place in a public sector today create the wrong set of incentives. We give your city more money if you run highways through the middle of it. We give your city more money, the less walkable you make it. If you live way out on the cul-de-sac, you're going to pay the same sewer bill as if you live right in the neighborhood 3 blocks from the sewer plant. Those are like insane, crazy incentives that we've set up. I think we have to go out and look and recognize that in this city, we have multiple families living in single-family homes. And there's nothing wrong with that. Why is that against the rules? We have people running businesses out of their homes. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way people have built wealth for literally thousands of years. Why are we uptight about that? We have people crossing the street in the middle of the street. Why do we call that jaywalking? That's called success. When you have so many people who want to cross the street that you don't need to wait for crosswalks and traffic signals and okay, that's a successful place. So get on with it. Like seriously, I think the answer to your question earlier too is just get on with it. Don't be held up by what happens here. Don't be held up by what the city does or what the rules and regulations are. We will define those as a society.
Hey, let's give Chuck a round of applause. I was so passionate for the past 2 years I've been trying to get him here to really provide this strong message approach. When I heard about Strong Towns 3-4 years ago, I definitely, as an elected official, took on that approach. And so when you hear me talking about all this stuff, it's because it's somebody who I consider a mentor and a hero that has really transformed me in the way I view the world and how I try to share information with our staff is because of the Strong Towns approach. So thank you,
Well,
Chuck.
I think you are a hero.